Okay, great. I think I'm going to go ahead and start then. Thank you all for joining us tonight. My name's Larry Butler, and I'm speaking for the East Hawaii Cultural Center in beautiful, rainy Hilo, Hawaii. And tonight we're going to be talking about Islamic art, and specifically in Hawaii, where one of the country's absolutely best Islamic art museums has recently opened and gotten organized and up and running, and that is the Shangri Mansion in Honolulu. I thought that would be kind of nice. Islamic art is one of my own fields. I've taught it, researched it, published it for 30 some years, and I'm delighted to find myself in Hawaii with this wonderful collection of Islamic art nearby. So let me see if I can share my screen and see what we can do here. Slideshow from the beginning. There we go. And I'm hoping you can all see that. An introduction to Islamic art through Honolulu's Shangri-La Museum of Islamic Art, Culture, and Design. That's one of their fans, by the way. It's not air conditioned, but you get this nice Ottoman design fan when you walk in the door. What's Shangri-La? Shangri-La is the mansion, the Honolulu mansion of Doris Duke. She had a bunch of mansions all over the map, but this was one of her favorite. She built it in 1937 and became notorious there. Who was she? She's kind of forgotten about nowadays. The Duke family was a tobacco fortune from North Carolina, Duke University, you know, all that stuff. She was famous for hanging out with Sufers like the Kahanamoku brothers. She was a playgirl. She had several husbands, several divorces, and had a wonderful time globetrotting. Never particularly settled down with anyone, but over the years became a serious collector of Islamic art, which she collected and assembled at this one mansion, not her mansion in Newport or her mansion in Florida or her mansion in New Jersey, but here in Honolulu. She was a world traveler. She collected Islamic decorative arts. And I should say she was not Muslim, and we can't find any record that she was really particularly interested in Islam, the religion. She was interested in Islam, the culture, and particularly Islamic art. Okay, we'll get more into that a little bit around. She did a round the world honeymoon in the 1930s with one husband or another and caught the bug. She toured Morocco and Spain, India, Syria, Turkey. All of these places, in fact, show up in the decoration and even some of the architecture of her mansion in Honolulu. She died in the 90s and left the whole thing to the Doris Duke Foundation for Islamic Art, which opened it up as a museum in 2002 and have just in the past few years radically redone the thing. It's no longer a museum of Doris Duke, which it was the first time I saw it in 2000. It's now more a museum, or 2010, excuse me. It's now increasingly a museum of Islamic art itself, as the memory of her fades, but nationally, internationally, interest in Islam and Islamic art have grown monumentally. They started an ambitious publishing program. On the left is, their original little booklet gives lots of the history of the place and some beautiful pictures. And increasingly, there's a high-end publishing bookshelf on the place. On the right there, Doris Duke's Shangri-La, a house in paradise, with a whole bunch of different articles by experts in Islamic art and architecture, as well as in the museum itself. Here's how it looks. From the ocean side, it's just below, just east of Diamond Head. It's on the water and built to be on the water. It's a series of courtyards. So it doesn't have much of a profile, but as we're going to see, that's actually a characteristic of Islamic architecture for palaces. They don't have a big profile. They sprawl, and you're not supposed to see inside. Here's a little plan of it just to give you a sense, and I'll come back to this another time. It's a series of pavilions, really, strung together around courtyards. And again, though the architect is American, and the design, the building itself is mostly kind of mid-century modern. It's concrete, it's sleek, it's flat-roofed. The way the rooms are laid out really does recall Islamic palaces with a main entry court and some state rooms, and then smaller courtyards for the service and for the bed and for the private parts of the palace that we aren't really meant to enter. So it's really very much in the spirit. Let's go in. You have to take a bus there. You have to take a little mini bus. This has the problem of so many small private museums in that it's in the middle of a neighborhood and the neighbors don't want buses. So to visit, you have to go to the Honolulu Museum of Art, which is a partner, and get a little minibus and tickets there. And that little minibus will take you on quiet rubber tires over to the front door here so the neighbors aren't disturbed. The facade has no windows, no hint, just a big door and a couple camels reminding us of the Silk Road. And then inside, you step on the doors and there's this large elevated foyer, which is lined with mostly Ottoman tiles, and then stairs that lead you down into the main courtyard, which is gorgeous. The main courtyard is Persian inspired. So it's 2 stories high and it has tall, thin Persian type columns and is completely walled with both antique and a number of modern Persian tile panels and a beautiful 16-sided star-shaped fountain, very much in the spirit of the places she was trying to evoke. You take the tour, you're going to be shown the living room, which is very much a modern space that's got lots of doodads from her travels. It's got a nice replica Moroccan ceiling, and it opens up with wonderful views to the ocean and to the gardens. This was a house for entertaining. This wasn't designed as a museum per se. It was for entertaining. The dining room is kind of over the top. It's next to the living room. And again, it's got some ocean views and it's got some modern Persian tiles. The panels there on the wall above the sofa. It's funny, the staff now is trying to make it more like a museum and less like a house, and they keep tinkering with the furnishings, you know, how much of her china to put out, how much to put it away. Stepping outside the living room or the dining room, you get wonderful views of Diamond Head and just out to the ocean. And there on the left, you can see the Persian style lanai. It is, in fact, a Persian style avan, a tall 2-story space with thin columns, capitals carved at the top. And down below is a little boat landing and beach that's constantly and currently under litigation with the county of Honolulu. Oh dear, different story. Here's the inner courtyard, the second courtyard, where the living room faces, and there's the bedroom wing in the back. And this all goes over to a water garden far beyond. Again, it's meant for entertaining. It's very Hollywood. It's quite lovely. It's modern with Orientalist touches, if you will. Her time in India is evoked by her own personal Mughal suite, Mughal Indian. This is the bathroom with floral panels inspired by the Taj Mahal and a bedroom off of that with all sorts of wonderful doodads. There's even a roof deck where she could do scandalous things that sometimes made their way into the paper at the time. She was quite the figure. In what was once a servant's wing are now installed a number of complete late Ottoman style rooms. And some of these are actually taken from specific mansions in Ottoman Syria. The Ottomans once ruled Syria back in Lawrence of Arabia days. And these are where a lot of the decorative arts are displayed now in vitrine glass cabinets. And the idea here is to give a sympathetic setting to the decorative arts that she collected. The gardens sprawl down from this. There's a long series of fountains with vaguely Mughal, vaguely Persian elements to the garden. There's also a great swimming pool off to the left. She was quite a swimmer and hung out with the surfer boys. This might remind you of similar museum mansions. If you're familiar maybe with Boston, you probably know the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum from, a couple generations before, where a wealthy society woman toured Europe and brought it all back and built herself a Venetian-style mansion in the middle of Boston next to the Fine Arts Museum and filled it with some of America's very best works of art, all absolutely exactly where she put them, and we're not allowed to move them. That's in her will. Oh dear. They actually had to go to court to sue themselves to be allowed to take delicate wooden paintings out of the cold Boston winter window drafts. So there's a tradition from the Gilded Age of building these palatial mansions and then leaving them after death as public museums filled with works of art. So that's what Mrs. Gardner did. Just in this mansion, she didn't do it in her others, but she and her architect worked to wrap the building around the treasures she collected. And some of it is quite sympathetic, like that room on the right, I think. And some of it's a little jarring, like finding the mihrab from a holy man's tomb on the narrow hallway between the dining room and the kitchen. Well, okay. This is what happens when you design around your collection. So I promised an introduction to Islamic art through this museum. And the first question is, well, what is Islamic art? Does that just mean the religious art of Islam? It can. It also refers to the arts of the Islamic world. And those sometimes aren't even by Muslims. Those might be by Armenians, they might be by Syrian Christians, Coptic Egyptians. But in any case, the Islamic world, as we understand it today, spans, starting in the Middle East, spreading out through North Africa, into Spain, all across Central Asia, South Asia, as far as Beijing, as far as Fairfax, Virginia, and everywhere in between, Honolulu. So it can also mean the art of Islamic patrons or arts inspired by Islamic design. What that means is it can include architecture like the Alhambra there, textiles, it can include figural art. And I'll have more to say about that in a minute. There's an image of the Prophet Muhammad ascending into heaven. Really? Yeah. In fact, the name Islamic art is so problematic that the Met actually recently renamed its Gallery of Islamic Art. So now it's the Gallery of the Art of the Arab lands, Turkey, Iran, Central Asia, and later South Asia. Just as a way of getting around the problem. What's Islamic about a carpet? Okay. PowerPoint. There we are. Let me review a little bit of history, just a little, I promise. Islam is perhaps the newest of the great world religions. It was established by the Prophet Muhammad in 622 of our day. And in that time, take a look at the map here. The great power of the Mediterranean was the Byzantine Christian Empire. They had always had trouble with Persia on the eastern borders, just as the Romans had. They were having trouble with Egypt, which is of the rebellious. Nobody expected the big trouble to come from the deserts of Arabia. The Byzantines barely knew about it. But under the leadership of the Prophet Muhammad, from about 622 to about 650, this is the map. Kaboom, the green parts exploded with the new religion. It completely conquered Persia, and it backed Byzantium up into a corner there, taking away Byzantine Syria, Byzantine Palestine, Byzantine Egypt. The two early capitals of the Islamic Arab Empire were Mecca, where the Prophet was from, and Medina, about 200 miles to the north, where the Prophet fled with his colony and established the government of Islam. We give a little thought to Mecca. Here's a not terribly recent photo of Mecca with the famous Kaaba shrine in the center, the cube draped in black velvet with the gold inscriptions. This is a monument of immemorial antiquity. It's been built, it's been rebuilt, that actually floods when it floods. Traditionally in Islam, it is said to be the shrine to the one God built by Abraham and Ishmael. And what we do know historically is that for centuries, this was the focus of polytheistic pilgrimage from all the various tribes of Arabia with all of their various images. And it's out of that milieu that the Prophet was born into a trading family. This is a great trading crossroads. It wasn't the middle of nowhere by any means. It was where the spice roads and the incense routes of Yemen and Arabia went up to join the Mediterranean through Egypt and through Syria and across the desert to the Persian Gulf. So it's very much a cultural crossroads, a very busy place and an ancient center of religion and pilgrimage. So what happened? What happened is Muhammad, who seems to have been illiterate, a moderate member of a wealthy trading family that he'd married into, he was, we're told, a community leader, a highly virtuous man, and was taken to meditation. And one day, the year, our year, about 610, retired to this very cave on the outskirts of Mecca, and to his shock, received a revelation, as all of those prophets of the Middle Eastern desert had done for as long as the Old Testament. What was a revelation? He saw an archangel, the archangel Gabriel, who spoke in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate, and said, proclaim or read in the name of thy Lord and cherisher who created man out of a leech-like clot. Proclaim, and thy Lord is most bountiful and has created the pen. And it goes on from there. Well, being an illiterate man, he memorized this, as those people do, went down, told his family, and over the next 12 years, assembled an ever-growing crowd of people coming to listen to his continuing revelations. He continued to receive 114 revelations altogether, which now are bundled together, and that is what the Qur'an is. It's the 114 revelations to the Prophet Muhammad, copied down by his followers and passed down to us, basically word perfect, from the 7th century AD. How do we know that? We have some very, very ancient copies here. In fact, not the most ancient by any means. Recently, Birmingham University in Britain found in their library a couple pages that look to date from maybe a generation after the lifetime of the Prophet, and it's word perfect with today's Qur'ans. So it's been passed on very, very faithfully through memorization, and then eventually was put down on paper. The early Qur'ans are written in an then evolving form of Arabic. There was an Arabic written language before, but the Qur'an forced the standardization. And so a good Muslim scholar would not only memorize the Qur'an word for word from childhood, but would also increasingly refine the written Arabic so that the Qur'an could be written, preserved, passed on, and importantly, it had to be letter perfect, including vowels, so that someone who didn't know Arabic could still learn to read Qur'an. I did. When I studied Arabic, that's the first thing they had us do, is practice learning Qur'an, memorize a few Quranic verses. It's a very good language for memorizing and a good way to learn it. You see that in Shangri, they do in fact have one of these very early pages, circa 900, where that's the top picture here. The words were written in a thick black pen, very little decoration, but the red are the vowels and the diacriticals, which evolved to help make the Qur'an legible for a beginner. What this means is that the primary art of Islam is the art of calligraphy, and always has been. You know, in the West, we have a hierarchy. The great arts are painting, architecture, sculpture. You might throw in printmaking, ceramics. In the Islamic tradition, the first and greatest of the arts is calligraphy, and calligraphy in Arabic, because the chapters of the Quran were received by the Prophet directly from the Word of God through the Archangel in Arabic. So the Quran is regarded not as written about religion. The Quran is literally the Word of God and treated as such. To write the Quran, to write Arabic, is to write a sacred language, the language that God spoke and gifted to the Prophet. So to be an Islamic artist, really the basics is, as in maybe China and Japan and Korea, the basics is calligraphy. And the calligraphy traditionally is done with a reed pen. You see one there in the upper left. It's the same as the pen described in the Quran, the pen that writes down all of humankind's deeds and writes the great book that God will consult on the day of judgment. So you don't need much to make Islamic right. You need basically literate education. And beyond that, you train for many years to learn different styles of writing appropriate for different uses. You use a black ink, or if you're doing something fancy, you can use gold ink. Let me give you some Arabic. Let's learn some Arabic. The most basic word of all, and easy to learn, is the name of God, Allah. We're reading from right to left. And so if you can follow my little arrow there, there's the tall stem is Ah, L, L, H, Allah. And the vowels are written above. This is what we call a cursive hand, which means it's curvilinear. Doesn't mean it's cursing. No. It means it's curvilinear. It can also be written in a blockier hand. You see the A, L, L, H, A, L, L, H. And this is more suitable for things like, say, brickwork, or the heading of a newspaper uses this kufic or blocky script. So now you all know one word in Arabic, Allah. If you were in my classroom, I'd make you all practice writing it out. So take a look. Here is, in the name of God, the Merciful, the Compassionate. Bismilah Rahim. And can you see the second letter, the second word here is Allah. A, L, L, H. So it's Bismillah Rahman Rahim. And if you learn that Allah, the next time you visit an Islamic art collection, you will see it everywhere. And you can say, look, I know what that says. Here's Muhammad, the name of the prophet. Again, it can be written in a cursive form, like, oh, this is the way my students might sign their papers, Muhammad, or Muhammad, you kind of stack the letters. It can be written in a blocky form, like this orange, the lower right, M-H-M-D. Where are the vowels? Oh, you add them. Here are all the vowels. Here's an Ottoman example, M-H-M-D, and so forth. Is that okay? Oh yeah, you can even play with it. Look at this one. This is from the Shangri collection. By the way, a lot of the collection is in the house, but also a lot of it is also in display on loan to the Honolulu Museum of Art. They're separate institutions, but they're partners. And so the Honolulu Museum has a whole gallery of Islamic art, all from the Shangri collection. So this is the name Muhammad written in mirror calligraphy. M. I have a hard time with it. M, I cannot find the H. It's in here somewhere. Oh, there it is. H, M, D. Mirrored. Is that okay? Yes. In calligraphy and Islamic tradition, you can do all sorts of wordplay. You can mirror. You can make it in the form of other figures. You can do all sorts of things, and it's all fair play. So when you memorize those two things, if you memorize Allah and Muhammad, you'll see them everywhere when you visit Shangri-La or the Honolulu Museum or the Met or anywhere in Morocco or Turkey. Now, calligraphy, it may sound boring, but there's no reason in the world for it to be boring. Take a look at this. This is a spectacular Qur'an, the opening of the Qur'an from a 14th century Egyptian example. And on the right, this is how the Quran starts. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And that goes into the first chapter. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Glory to God, the maker of the world. And this little prayer here, this is the first page, that's the second, reading right to left. This, in fact, is sort of the equivalent of the Lord's Prayer in Arabic. And every Muslim knows this prayer. Every prayer service includes it. It's recited when you need to recite a prayer. This is the prayer you recite. This is chapter 1 of the Quran. Here's a lovely later example in the Shangri-La collection. Again, the first surah here, the one I just read you, that's on the most decorative page. And traditionally, that's what happens. That's the opening. In fact, that's what it's called. It's called Fatiha, the opening verse. It's always very elaborately decorated. And then subsequent chapters are not so elaborately decorated. But every Quran you're ever going to encounter is word perfect. And people have spent hundreds of generations making that true. Calligraphy has a lot of uses in Islamic art. Even when we're not looking at figural imagery, notice just how rich these things are. They're very richly decorated with a whole quite specific decorative vocabulary, including geometry, calligraphy, floral design, primarily. So, for instance, here's a mosque lamp. This is from a 14th century mosque in Cairo. We know that because the lamp actually gives the dedication to the donor, and it's the surah of light, appropriate for a lamp. God is the light of the heavens and the earth. A likeness of his light is like a niche in which is a lamp. The lamp is in a glass, and the glass is, as it were, a shining star, lit by oil from an olive tree, neither of the east nor of the west. God sets forth metaphors. It's a beautiful verse. That's how it goes. And you can imagine how that would enrich a mosque lamp. And there's the Qur'an is written up there in the blue calligraphy. And then in smaller inscriptions, it gives the donor of the mosque and the donor of the lamp. There's a copy of this, in fact, a rough copy in the Shangri collection. Other arts of the book include bookbinding, something the Arab Muslims picked up from the Copts of Egypt. The Copts of Egypt invented the kind of bookbinding we use today. Pure geometry, geometric design, this is part of the arts of the book, floral borders, and even furniture, either a reading stand or in this case, a mosque casket, where Quran casket, where various volumes of the Quran could be kept in one place if you had a multi-volume set. Calligraphy bleeds into the secular arts. It's not just for Islamic art at all. Here are two examples of a very famous type of ceramics from 10th century Central Asia. It's a buff clay with a white overglaze or white underglaze, and then you use black just to do calligraphy around the edges. Isn't that beautiful? A little bit of abstracted floral design. This one on the left is a very famous piece that's now in the Freer Gallery in Washington. And you can only just make out maybe that around the outer rim is calligraphy. And I'm reluctant to translate. No, I'm not. It's so beautiful. It means something like, he who believes his own opinions is an idiot. Blessings to the owner. These are luxury gifts. They have nothing to do with religion. They're proverbs. They're fortune cookies. And they're fun because they're one of our oldest collections of folk sayings that have come down to us. But look how elegant, like the one on the right, there's nothing on it except extremely attenuated Arabic calligraphy, and it's just gorgeous. Let me talk a little bit about the notion of decoration of art without imagery, or what we call aniconic, no image. This is prominent in Islamic art, and in fact, a lot of people think that Islamic art only has aniconic imagery. It's not really true, but in a religious setting, it is true. You'll never go to a mosque and see a picture. You won't. You'll never open a Quran and see an image of anybody. Instead, Islam developed a very rich vocabulary of calligraphy, floral design, symbols, and pure geometry. And this is a wall from in the Islamic Gallery in Honolulu. All of these pieces are in the Shangri collection on loan to the Honolulu Art Museum. All are aniconic, but they're all very much meaningful. Aniconic art isn't meaningless at all. You see here a lamp and footprints and candles, and this is the prayer niche from a mosque. So these are all allusions to the Holy Scriptures, to God's light is like a lamp in a crystal niche. Footprints rather than images of the prophet or a saint. Candles you'll still see in a mosque on either side of this niche. More floral design. Some of this calligraphy, that double Muhammad. Here's an inscription from a mosque from Turkey, and interlocking here. So there's a rich design vocabulary, even though it's not, doesn't contain animal or human images. Now that said, That's not a universal law. Take a look at this. On the left is a tile panel from Ottoman Turkey. This would have been brought back by a pilgrim from the Hajj to Mecca. A pilgrim who's been to Mecca, been to the Kaaba, done his ablutions, done his prayers. The image is abstract. There are absolutely no people shown. What's shown? Buildings, outer buildings, a description in Arabic, and then decoration. But imagine my surprise when I came upon this piece on the right. It's a small miniature painting in the Shangri collection. It's probably from Baghdad, they're not really sure, 18th century, which very unusually shows pilgrims themselves. Men in the pilgrimage suit, the two pieces of white cloth, circling the Kaaba in Mecca. No attempt here to hide human faces of the human body. That's unusual. I admit it's very unusual. You do find it later in Islamic art. You do find it in specific traditions. So you'll find it in India. You'll find it in Persia. You'll find it in Turkey. Less so anywhere else, never in Saudi Arabia. So the ban on imagery, it's not actually in the Quran. The ban on figural imagery is part of the traditions of the Prophet, the Hadith, which are important but don't have the authority of the Quran, which is in fact the word of God. But their tradition is very strong to avoid human figural imagery in religious art. But there are always exceptions to that. Let me talk a little bit about Islamic architecture. And again, we can use Shangri-La to help us understand it. The oldest building in Islam, built in Islam, still standing, is the Dome of the Rock, that very famous building in the center of Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. It was built in the late 7th century by the Caliph Abdul Malik. It is miraculously almost intact from the day it was born. It somehow survived the Crusades. It survived earthquakes. It survived the 20th century, and there it is today. Recently restored, the dome looks better now. If you know your Roman architecture, you realize this is a reasonable derivation of late Roman domed architecture. A late Roman tomb, for instance, is often square or circular or octagonal like this with a dome in the center. But it's very grand. It's on a larger scale. The exterior, that's mostly later Ottoman tiles, restoring it. But inside, there's the rock on the left and the dome above it. Now, what's the point of this building? It's not actually a mosque. It's sometimes known as the Mosque of Omar, but it isn't. It's a shrine, and it's a shrine to that site. This is the rock on the Temple Mount from which tradition says the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven once on the night journey and once again after his death in 632. And there he is riding the miraculous steed Rock. The illustration, by the way, if you can see that, his face is veiled. It's rare to see a depiction of Muhammad in Islamic art. It happens, but when it happens, almost always he's shown with his face completely veiled because it's too sacred to be shown. There are even exceptions to that, but I'm not going to torment you with those. My point is that the illustrative tradition is full of figural imagery if you know where to look. Now, interestingly, not only is this the oldest building in Islam, it's also the oldest architectural inscription in Islam. And if you look on the right, you can see a band of Kufic writing. That is the Quranic chapter Maryam, which is a chapter of the Quran that specifically invites Jews and Christians to join the movement. And there this is plonked down in the heart of Jerusalem, right next to the Christian Holy Sepulchre and right on the Jewish Temple Mount. So the building is deeply symbolic. It's also, if you notice, done in a good Roman Corinthian order. Okay. How is it appropriate then to decorate a religious building? First of all, calligraphy is always appropriate. Distinctively Islamic is the rich geometric decoration that you can see here. These are two images from the Alhambra Palace, actually, but this is also common in Moroccan mosques, or really in anybody's mosques. An inscription up here in Kufic, and then geometry. Now, you might not think of it, but geometry is not meaningless by any means. Going right back to the ancient Greeks, which the Arabs read very well, geometry was understood as the map of the universe. And in Islam, in the holy writings, in philosophical writings, in Sufi prophecies and such, geometry is understood as the plan of God's universe. Unity is a huge concept in Islam. The unity of God is absolute, no trinity, unity. The unity of God's creation, the unity of God's plan, the unity of God's community, the Islamic ummah or community. So unity is a big concept. And what geometry like this expresses is the beauty inherent in the complex geometry of God's universe. In medieval Islam, the educated classes knew their Greek philosophy as well as their Qur'an, and they also knew their geometry and their arithmetic. And they would have understood the generating principles behind these designs, sort of like, what do we call it in computers? The little, the pattern that makes the computer do its thing. So this is actually a poetic way, without using any imagery at all, to express the beauty and unity of God's creation. Another way that's always correct is floral designs, arabesques, we call them. Somewhat stylized, often repeating rhythmic, interwoven patterns of floral decoration. And again, so many examples you can see at Shangri in the tile patterns. You can see it everywhere in the Islamic world. I would love to know how on earth they planned that carved stone dome in Cairo, communicated the plans of the artisans who carved the design, and got it all together right. Wow. A fourth element of decoration that's always correct is one unique to Islam. That's what we call muqarnas. That Q is a back of the throat. Muqarnas design is unique to Islam, and it's global in Islam. It's like instant visual symbol. What it is a star pattern that has been exploded in 3 dimensions. Wow. On the left there, you can see the pattern worked out and then how it was stretched without the aid of computers and formed into these incredibly complex stalactite ceilings, they're sometimes called. There's a little bit of this at Shangri-La. Yes, there is. Muqarnas vaulting, that idea of shimmering, not really functional, but dazzlingly beautiful faceted vaults in this little niche. Put it all together, I could never teach. I taught this for 30 some years. I could never teach without that picture. In Isfahan, Iran, there's the Masjid-e-Shah Mosque. It has floral designs. It's got calligraphy in Kufic. It's got calligraphy in Cursive. It's got geometry. It's got muqarnas holding up the little shelters on the minarets there. Puts it all together. This is the stuff that really threw Doris Duke when she started collecting. So I say she was not a Muslim and shows no particular interest in Islam, the religion, but she found this combination of decorative arts absolutely dazzling. And hence that main courtyard with 16-pointed star fountains surrounded by beautiful Persian tile mosaics that she commissioned. So the mosque. Can we learn about mosques from her? Sure we can, why not? Mosques are different all over the world, but they share very few, very simple common features. The mosque is supposedly based on the house of the Prophet Muhammad in Medina, where Islam was established in 622, their year 1. And you see a large courtyard with a small, long covered prayer hall, a step throne for someone to preach from, and the community all around. That's the basis of a mosque. Standard parts today are still a prayer hall. The niche here towards Mecca, it's called the mihrab. When you pray pointing that way. The minbar is the preaching throne. The rest of the room is just basically carpeting, where you pray in groups, usually men down on the floor, women often in secluded lounges behind. You have a courtyard, you come in the front, you do your washing, your ablutions. There's a prescribed ritual wash. you're called to prayer from the minaret. And that's basically true of every mosque from Beijing, China to Fairfax, Virginia to Honolulu. They're all going to have those features. Down here, you can see a great mosque in Cairo. There's the mihrab niche. There's the minbar. Nothing happens in that niche. It's just the direction to pray. It's a contemplative focus and the most decorated part of any mosque. The mihrab is for the Friday sermon, where the preacher goes up the steps and will deliver the Friday sermon, which is the big sermon of the week. And lo and behold, there it is in between Doris Duke's dining room and her living room is one of the great preserved medieval mihrabs. It was made in pieces in Iran. Dates, it's signed and dated to 1265. It was taken from a ruined tomb of a local imam. It's a spectacular piece. It's one of the finest pieces of Islamic art in America. And I'm sort of embarrassed that it's between her living room and her dining room. I really wish they would put this in the Honolulu Museum and give it a bit more respect. But anyway, there it is. Completely surrounded by calligraphy from the Qur'an and floral design, geometric design, as we've seen. That mihrab, that niche, becomes a work of art in its own. You find it in prayer carpets, you find it in tiles. Here are some from the Doris Duke collection, the Shangri collection. These are both in the Honolulu Museum, where you see the lamp hanging in a stylized niche, or here you see the same thing with the footprints and the candles, indicating holy people. The minbar is the preaching throne. This is maybe the most famous medieval one still standing. This is in Marrakesh, Morocco, probably made in Islamic Spain. Minarets vary wildly all over the world, and I'm sorry, Shangri-La does not have a minaret. I wish it did. Morocco, Algeria, Central Asia, Beijing, West Africa, they're all in local styles. That's where the muezzin calls to prayer. So a standard mosque would look like this. This is one of the very early ones in Tunisia. You can see the courtyard, the mosque, the prayer hall, and the far end of the prayer hall, the mihrab and the minbar. Again, these vary wildly all over the world, but they all have the same elements, whether they're from Spain, from Persia, or from Turkey. And modern mosques continue the same traditions, often with a dome. It's not required, but often there's a dome, echoing that very first Islamic building, the Dome of the Rock. How about luxury arts? Shangri-La is a better reflection of course, palaces and luxury arts. The Alhambra here, maybe some of you have been to. It's like Shangri-La. It's a succession of public spaces and courtyards going to private spaces and private courtyards. And the deeper you go, the more important you are and the more exclusive. Again, very much like Shangri-La. The vocabulary is largely the same as you'd find in a mosque. Water, tiles, woodwork, wooden ceilings, and all of these elements, these are very well known and well known to Mrs. Duke's decorators and architects. The Court of the Lions here, this is probably the far end of the palace. Might have been a different palace originally joined to the other one, but it's very small, very intimate, full of water. Water gushes from the fountain there, gushes through these channels, and all of the decorative arts are what we've seen. That fabulous Muqarnas ceiling, the fabulous carved calligraphy and geometry. It's the decorative arts that are now missing from the Alhambra. And when I'm there, I always wonder, where are the curtains? Where's the ceramics? They're all in museums now. But this is what Shangri-La was meant to reflect. The sequence from the main entry into the main court to the staterooms, and perhaps if you're a special guest, into the intimate quarters with 3 different courtyards at work here. 1, 2, 3, 4 different courtyards at work. So Shangri-La evokes Islamic Spain, Al-Andalus, in this arcade, in these columns, in the great Hispanic Moorish style tile that faces those arches. She actually sent off to Morocco to have Moroccan workers here build her a Moroccan-style wooden ceiling for the living room. So she's continuing to design decorations. And she's also continuing another tradition. That is the tradition of princely arts. Where in princely arts, they're not religious. It's many of these pieces are figure decoration. Shangri-La has quite a few. Last time I was there, they were having a little show called The Princely Cycle of Images, which means the images traditionally associated with kingship. That would be war, hunting, chess, music, gardens, feasting. Many of these are manuscript pages. This is a page from a royal Shahnameh manuscript that's now at Shangri-La. It's the Persian Book of Kings. It's a traditional book that's traditionally lavishly illustrated. You might know examples from the Metropolitan Museum, where there's a famous, two of them, in fact. It's the story of Persia, actually pre-Islamic Persia, of all things. It figures in with Alexander the Great, Roman emperors, demons, ogres, trolls from the north, and of course the great Persian heroes like Rustam and the others. So figural arts, you don't see them in mosques or Qur'ans, but you do find them in luxury private goods, things that aren't going to circulate outside of the palace. And they're in all sorts of media. Here's a piece from Shangri-La in Seljuk Persian ceramics, a very specific style using a specific kind of paint. It's almost like lacquer paint. You can't use it much. If you use it, it's going to smear. But these are for decoration, for ceremonial purposes. And they very often show princes, warfare, and such like. As do traditional Islamic textiles. One of the great imports and exports of the Islamic world is silk. A lot of trade between between China and Islam, the Silk Roads. Often the Islamic examples include calligraphy. There's an upside down inscription that tells us when it was made and for whom. Well, thank you, it's a label. They show great elephants, they show griffins, wonderful things. And again, Shangri-La has some lovely examples of Islamic silken textiles, carpets, furniture material, shawls, costumes from all different parts of the Islamic world. Glass and crystal are traditional Islamic decorative luxury arts. And again, glass at Shangri-La reflects different types. She has a lot of lamps, including that one on the right that's kind of a copy of the one I showed you earlier from Cairo. They have some antique examples from Syria, Mesopotamia. Syria, Lebanon, Egypt is where glass really began and continues all through the Islamic period. The real joy of visiting Shangri-La is seeing these things in a luxury context, which is exactly where luxury arts were always meant to be seen. They weren't meant to be lined up against a white wall in a museum. They're meant to be part of a luxury room. And so great care has been taken to assemble the luxury arts within these gorgeous assembled period rooms that sprinkle one wing of Shangri-La. And they rotate these. Of course, textiles have to be rotated. There's always more in storage than there is on display, but they include a whole range of ceramics from the very earliest Mesopotamia to these marvelous Ottoman, Turkish, and later Persian examples of ceramics. And they're meant to be displayed sympathetically along with textiles, along with the other decorative arts. And that's something so few museums manage to do. It's a real joy of visiting here. Also, some of the more modern rooms, she simply takes them and uses them in a more 20th century way. You know, jumble up an Alhambra vase there in white on some Moroccan something or other and turn something else into a lamp. Yeah, well, that's another way that rich people display their antiquities. Another interesting theme there, since she was a woman collector, is the new museum there is emphasizing women in Islam. And that's an interesting theme, something that other Islamic art collections don't do. And so last time I was there, they're having a whole exhibition of women's bath implements. Bathing was a huge part of women's social life in pre-modern Islam. That's where women went out to have a good time. They weren't out on the streets, but once they finished shopping, they could go to the women's baths and hang out and check each other out and look for marriageable brides for their sons and all that kind of good thing. So they have some costumes there. They're now sympathetically displayed, both with the bathhouse of Doris Duke and with these bathing implements. It makes a very satisfying contextual way to display the art. Water itself is a huge part of Islamic architecture, and they're beginning to publish that. This is a wonderful catalog from a show they did just a few years ago in another Doris Duke house in Newport, Rhode Island, where they showed water and water implements and bath implements and the gardens. Even sort of appropriate, they're now showing water damage. Well, Shangri-La is on the waterfront of Honolulu, and some of the tiles, unfortunately, are already being damaged by high tides. Oh dear, just like they are in Turkey. Final little note, the Shangri-La Museum is trying not to be just a warehouse of goodies and not just a historical collection. It is trying to be very much a living arts center. And to that end, are regularly inviting local and international artists and performers to come and even do residencies, some of them at Shangri-La. There's actually a guest house now for residencies. Or they come and they do their own art or their own performance in response to the themes of the Shangri-La Museum, say water. There's a big island artist who's recently featured, Ahana Yoshihata. She works in acrylic painting, and there's her piece, lower right, isolated, and upper right, installed in situ, responding to the dining room. And what they'll do is they'll give different artists a room to work in, and they can do their own contemporary art reflecting that room. Here's another artist with Hawaii and Indonesia connections, Loris Tragman. On the left is her work in textile. She does printing on cloth. And on the right, there is a scene from the guest house at Shangri-La, which I'm sure was part of her inspiration when she was doing her work there. So this is what Shangri-La is all about. It's for learning about global cultures of Islamic art and design. It's also about inspiring local and Pacific Ocean and global artists of today and to respond to Islamic art and to take it in their own personal directions. So that's my little look at Shangri-La. I hope you've learned a little bit about Islamic art, and I hope it inspired you to visit next time you're in Honolulu. And thank you very much. Here's my source of photos, mostly mine. Some are scans from those books, and some are from Wikipedia in the public domain. And thank you so much for joining us at East Hawaii Cultural Center. I'm going to stop this and open up to questions, if I can. Here we are. Okay, does anybody have any questions or comments? Uh-oh.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Oh, I'm sorry. Say loud.
Thank you. That was quite wonderful.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining. I put a little note in the comments section. We would love to have your comments. I think Monique is going to send out an after the fact questionnaire and that sort of thing. We'd love to have your responses. They work well for us. If you want to donate, we're thrilled with that too, of course, and we'll be very happy. I'm going to look at the chat here and see what people have said. Thank you for your support. Mahalo, mahalo, mahalo. And I guess, are there any questions, or shall we end on that? Nope. Hearing none. Well, thank you all so much for your attention. This will be put up on YouTube in a few days, and it'll be there if you want to review it or send it to your buddies.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much.